My name is Isabella Vance, and at 28, I walked through the front door of my childhood home for the first time in 5 years. No welcome, no hug, just the cold silence of a house that had already decided I didn't belong. Inside, they were laughing over dinner. Lucas, my brother, was being praised for another promotion. Me, I didn't even get a seat at the table. They still saw me as the difficult one, the disappointment, the mistake who chose the military over spreadsheets and suits. But I didn't come back for their approval. That night, as I swallowed the bitter silence, one thought echoed in my mind. You made me invisible. Tomorrow I'll make you watch. If you've ever been erased by your own family, this story is for you. The dining room hadn't changed. Same mahogany table, same chandelier that always flickered on the left bulb. But the air felt different, thicker somehow, like even the walls were holding their breath. "Ah," my mother said, walking in from the kitchen. "You're back." No smile, no warmth. She barely looked up from the tray of roasted chicken she was carrying. "You must be tired. Lucas just got promoted again, you know. Executive director, big title." I nodded, but she had already turned her back to me. Lucas strolled in like he owned the place. Armani suit, flashy watch, that smug grin that had only grown sharper over the years. "Hey sis," he said casually, not even making eye contact. "Still doing the soldier thing?" I opened my mouth to reply, but he was already on to his next monologue. Some major project he was leading, a possible merger, a fancy dinner with a CEO named Rachel Thorne. My dad leaned in, eyes shining with pride. "He's taking the family name to new heights." I stood there, invisible again. At dinner, I took the seat furthest from the spotlight. No one asked about my life. I offered a story anyway, about a peacekeeping mission we'd just wrapped up. But halfway through, my mother interrupted. "Ashley just opened her own clinic. Isn't that wonderful? So elegant and smart." Lucas snorted. "Honestly, Izzy, what kind of future is there in the military? All grit, no glory? It's not exactly respectable." The table laughed. I didn't. I tightened my grip on the fork. My palms were sweaty. My heart pounded, but I kept my face neutral, because if I let them see even a flicker of pain, they'd win. After dinner, I stood in front of the hallway mirror. My reflection looked calm, but I knew better. They want to forget who I am? Fine. Tomorrow, I'll remind them, loud and clear. I guess I always knew I was the extra piece, the one that didn't quite fit into the family picture. My earliest memory of being less started with a birthday. I was turning 8. I had asked for a telescope. Nothing fancy, just one I saw in a department store catalog. I loved the stars back then. They made me feel small, but in a good way. Like there was something bigger than our living room arguments and my mom's disappointment. Instead, I got a pink sweater, the kind with itchy wool and a bow stitched into the collar. "Isn't it lovely?" my mother had said. So ladylike. Lucas, on the other hand, turned 10 a week later. The entire backyard was transformed into a pirate ship. He got a Nerf blaster, a new bike, and a cake shaped like a treasure chest. Dad dressed up as the captain. Mom filmed the whole thing. Everyone cheered when Lucas hit the piñata. I just watched and clapped, because that's what good little sisters do, right? Later that night, I asked why I didn't get a party like his. "You're not the kind of girl who needs all that," my mom said, brushing off my question like it was lint on her blouse. "And besides, girls should be more modest." What I heard was, you don't matter as much. It wasn't just the birthdays. When Lucas and I fought, because, let's be honest, all siblings fight, I was always the one to get blamed. "Isabella, stop provoking him." "You're older, act like it." I wasn't older. "You know how sensitive your brother is." Sensitive. He once locked me in the attic for an hour because I beat him at Monopoly. But when I screamed for help and Dad found me, I got grounded. Lucas got ice cream. At school, I worked hard. Straight A's, perfect attendance, even a spelling bee trophy in 4th grade. I brought it home, beaming, expecting something, anything. Mom glanced at it and said, "That's nice, honey, but did you see Lucas's drawing? He's so creative." His drawing was a stick figure dog with 3 legs. Even the fridge told the story. His math quiz with a 72, magneted right up. My science fair ribbon, tucked inside a drawer somewhere with expired coupons. I stopped showing them things after that. Instead, I found corners to disappear into: books, soccer, science club, places where effort mattered more than charm, where no one asked me to smile more or be less intense. But even there, the comparisons followed. "Why can't you be more like Ashley?" Mom once asked, referring to a girl from church. Ashley played piano. She wore pastels. She never raised her voice. Ashley was wife material, apparently. I was too much, too loud, too stubborn, too opinionated. I once overheard my dad say, "She's smart, sure, but she's difficult." They said it like it was a flaw I'd been born with, something they'd have to apologize for to other people. By the time I hit high school, I started shrinking. Not physically, but emotionally. I stopped volunteering stories. I stopped asking them to come to soccer games. I stopped expecting them to notice the college prep courses I was taking or the recommendation letters piling up in my desk drawer. But what hurt most wasn't the silence. It was the way they cheered for Lucas. The way their eyes lit up when he walked into a room. The way my dad used to say, "Now that's my boy," after a business pitch Lucas did for the school's entrepreneurship contest. He won 3rd place. I had just placed first in a statewide writing competition that same week. No one brought it up. They didn't need to say it. I heard it loud and clear. He was the star. I was just a supporting role they never cast on purpose. Sometimes I wondered if they even knew me, really knew me. Like the way I hated the smell of lavender because it reminded me of the dress Mom forced me to wear at Aunt Helen's funeral. Or how I always slept with the closet door slightly open. Not because I was afraid, but because I liked the way the hallway light spilled in, like a guard on duty. But they never noticed those things. They knew Lucas's favorite cereal, his shoe size, his favorite childhood cartoon. Mine? I doubt they could even guess. The gap between us wasn't loud. It wasn't made of slaps or shouting matches. It was quiet. It lived in the way they listened to him and looked past me. In the way they remembered his milestones and forgot mine. In the way they always expected me to bend and praised him just for showing up. I remember once, in 8th grade, I stayed up all night, helping Mom clean the garage. The next morning, she told Lucas how helpful he was for moving 2 boxes. That was the day I realized some people don't love you less because of what you do. They love you less because of who you are not. And in that house, I was never going to be Lucas. So I began building a new version of myself in silence. One they couldn't touch, one they didn't see coming, but I still carried the ache. Quiet and sharp, like a splinter under the skin, small enough to ignore most days, but deep enough to bleed when pressed. By the time I turned 17, I had made peace with a truth no kid should have to swallow. If I wanted peace, I'd have to leave the battlefield I called home. At school, I was thriving, captain of the soccer team, top of my class in physics, and volunteering weekends at the local shelter. On paper, I looked like someone any parent would be proud of. But my parents weren't reading my story. They were too busy quoting Lucas's latest pitch deck, or how he nailed a mock trial presentation at his business prep camp. He was still average, but average wrapped in charm. That was enough. Meanwhile, I was applying for colleges in secret. I didn't tell them about the scholarships, the early acceptance letters, or the recruiters who had started circling me like hawks. It didn't matter. None of it ever seemed to. But the one thing I couldn't keep to myself was the decision that would change my life. I was joining the military, not ROTC, not just for college. I was going in full-time, straight after graduation. It wasn't a rebellion, it was clarity. The moment I said it aloud at dinner, everything shifted. "Are you joking?" my dad asked, dropping his fork. My mother froze mid-chew, then let out a sharp laugh. "Is this some phase?" "It's not a phase," I said quietly. "It's what I want." They stared at me like I'd announced I was joining a circus. Lucas just rolled his eyes. "Wow, can't wait to tell people my sister's off to play soldier." "You're throwing your life away," my dad snapped. "Do you know what people will think? That we raised a dropout?" "I'm not dropping out," I said. "I'm graduating with honors and a full offer." Mom slammed her hand on the table. "Why can't you just be normal? Why do you always have to go against us?" I didn't answer because I already knew the truth. Nothing I chose would ever be right, unless it was their choice first. From that day forward, the house turned colder. They didn't speak of my enlistment, didn't ask questions, didn't show up at my swearing-in ceremony. My dad said he was busy with a client golf event. My mom didn't even pretend to have an excuse. Only my best friend Ava came. She held my hand when I signed the papers. She cried when I boarded the bus to basic. My mother didn't even send a text. Basic training was brutal, not just physically. Emotionally, it stripped you raw. But for the first time, I wasn't shrinking to fit in. I ran until my lungs burned. I failed, then learned, then did it again. I pushed myself past exhaustion, past the voices in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother's. "You're too sensitive. You're not strong enough. No one will take you seriously." But my drill sergeant did. So did my unit. I was no longer the difficult one. I was Private Vance. I remember the first time I got commended for performance. Our commanding officer pulled me aside, looked me straight in the eye, and said, "You don't quit. That matters." I called home that night. I wanted to share the win, not for their praise, just to be seen. "Hey, Dad," I said, "I got recognized today. Top of my unit in field navigation." There was a pause, a long one. Then, "Well, I hope they're paying you enough to make it worth it." Click. No congrats. No, I'm proud of you. Just money. As if the only thing worth measuring was a paycheck. A few months later, I earned my first promotion. I still remember the weight of that insignia as they pinned it to my uniform, solid, real, earned. I called Mom this time, still clinging to a frayed thread of hope. She answered with her usual tone of polite obligation. "Just wanted you to know I made specialist," I said. "It's early. They said it's because I've shown leadership potential." She paused. "Specialist? That's below sergeant, right?" "Yes, but—" "Well," she sighed, "do they at least cover your health insurance now? Or are you still depending on the government?" Lucas's voice chimed in the background. "Tell her I just got offered a spot on Rachel Thorne's Innovation Task Force." I hung up before I could hear the rest. That was the day I stopped calling. You'd think it would get easier, that with every step forward, their absence would hurt less. It didn't. Every medal, every mission, every moment I stood taller. there was a voice inside me whispering, "I wish they saw this." But another voice, slowly growing louder, kept saying, "It's okay that they don't." The first time I truly listened to that second voice was after a night op in the desert. It had gone sideways. People froze. I didn't. Afterward, my commanding officer pulled me aside. "You've got something most don't," she said. "You lead through fire." That night, sitting under a quiet sky, I realized something. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was becoming someone they'd never understand. And maybe that was okay. Maybe I didn't need their validation. Maybe I never did. I started writing letters I never sent. Letters full of things I wish I could say, like, "You hurt me, but I built something strong from those scars. You tried to shrink me, but I grew anyway. You chose Lucas, I chose myself." In one letter, I wrote, "You'll never know the weight of the silence you left me in, but I carried it, and I learned to turn it into armor." I folded that one carefully, slipped it into my journal, and let it be enough. By the time I hit my 3rd year of service, the ache of being unseen had dulled into something else, resolve. I stopped chasing their recognition. I started building a life that didn't include them at the center. Not out of hate, not even anger. But because I finally understood, you don't need to keep bleeding just to prove you're hurt. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stop asking for love from people who refuse to give it. People always ask what's the hardest part about starting over. They expect you to say fear, uncertainty, the unknown. But for me, it was the silence, not the peaceful kind. The kind that settles in your bones when there's no one to text, no one to call. When your phone stays quiet on your birthday. When there's no care package waiting at the base mailroom. When your name isn't saved as favorite in anyone's contacts. That's the silence I walked into when I started my first long-term post after basic. Specialist Isabella Vance, 20 years old, alone. The base wasn't even in a town, just frozen air, cracked pavement, and buildings so gray they looked like ghosts. My barracks room was more like a storage closet. Concrete walls, 2 narrow beds, a flickering bulb, and a roommate who barely acknowledged I existed. She played music through cheap earbuds every night. Loud, angry. We never spoke unless absolutely necessary. It didn't matter. I wasn't there to make friends. I was there to work, to prove myself, to outrun the parts of me I didn't know how to fix. I took every shift I could. Night watch, maintenance drills, extra logistics checks. I volunteered for patrols, weather training, emergency simulations. Anything that kept my calendar full and my brain quiet. I got a reputation for being reliable, efficient, tireless. No one knew I wasn't trying to be the best. I was just trying to stay invisible long enough to survive. There were days I forgot to eat. Nights I didn't sleep more than a few hours. I lived off instant noodles, vending machine protein bars, and the bitterest coffee known to man. Somewhere in that blur of weeks, my body started giving out. Headaches, dizziness, blurred vision. I ignored it, took a painkiller, drank more water, kept moving. If I stopped, I might remember a one was watching. And then came Wednesday. I'd spent 6 hours outside, troubleshooting a frozen comms antenna during a storm. Rain mixed with sleet. My gloves were soaked, my stomach hollow. My hands shaking so badly, I dropped the screwdriver twice. When I stood up, the sky spun sideways. I tried to call out, but the world had already gone black. I woke up to beeping monitors, bright clinic lights, and a stabbing pain in the back of my skull. My jacket and boots had been removed. An IV dripped fluid into my arm. and sitting in the chair next to my bed, arms crossed, jaw clenched, was Sergeant Miller. Now, Miller wasn't what you'd call nurturing. He was infamous for surprise inspections and chewing you out for a crooked collar. He once made someone redo their entire locker because a sock was out of place. But the look on his face, that wasn't anger, it was concern. "You scared the hell out of Jenkins," he said without looking at me. "She found you face down in the bay." My throat felt like sandpaper. I croaked out, "Did I pass out?" "Low blood sugar, dehydration, mild hypothermia." He shook his head. "You were lucky. Could have cracked your skull open on that metal grate." I tried to sit up. He raised a hand. "Don't, just listen." He stood, paced once, then stopped at the edge of the bed. You think no one notices that if you run hard enough, long enough, no one will see what's chasing you. I stared at him. He sighed. "You're not the first soldier to wear pain like armor." That hit harder than I expected. He sat back down. "Nobody's checking in on you, are they?" I looked away. That answer didn't need words. Then, from his coat pocket, he pulled out a crushed chocolate oat bar. He placed it gently on the table beside me. "Eat something, sleep for more than 3 hours, and for God's sake, stop trying to die. For people who aren't even watching." His voice didn't soften, but his eyes did. That night, I sat on the edge of my bunk, still in a fog. The clinic had discharged me with orders to rest. I ignored half of them, but I didn't throw away the protein bar. I stared at it for hours before opening the wrapper. It tasted like cardboard. And care. It wasn't the flavor that mattered. It was what it meant. Someone saw me, not for what I could produce, not for what uniform I wore, not for how hard I could grind through pain. Just me. Sergeant Miller never brought it up again. But from that day on, things changed. He didn't hover, didn't pry, didn't ask questions. But I noticed the gloves left at my locker when the temp dropped below freezing. The spare hot coffee on the table after morning briefings. The unspoken way he always left space for me at the back of the room. He wasn't trying to fix me. He was just showing up. And in a world where no one had shown up for me unless I earned it, that meant everything. Connection, I realized, isn't always grand gestures. Sometimes it's a bar of protein and a sharp voice telling you to rest because you matter. Sometimes it's someone watching when you fall and helping you get back up, quietly, with dignity, without needing thanks. For someone who had spent her whole life begging to be seen. That one small act became the start of something big. I didn't trust easily, not back then. After a lifetime of being judged, ignored, or reduced to someone's disappointment, it was second nature to keep walls up, smile politely, keep my answers short, let people think they knew me without ever actually letting them close. But sometimes healing sneaks in, through cracks you didn't know you had. And it started, of all places, with poker night. It was Sergeant Miller who dragged me there, not literally, but close. "You're coming," he said. "No room for negotiation. You're not working tonight. You're not cleaning gear. You're going to sit with other human beings and play cards like a normal damn person." I mumbled something about equipment reports. He raised one eyebrow. That was the end of that. So I showed up, sat in the corner of the rec tent, arms crossed, watching the others joke and laugh, like none of us were thousands of miles from home, with sand in our boots and ghosts in our heads. Someone handed me a soda. Another slid the deck across the table. A third, Corporal Tan, winked. "Don't worry, we won't eat you alive. Unless you win." I didn't even realize I'd been holding my breath until I let it go. That night, I didn't win. But I laughed, not the polite kind, not the smile and nod so people don't ask questions kind. A real, stupid, snorting laugh when someone made a ridiculous bet and Lane dropped all his chips on the floor. It felt foreign and beautiful. After that, something shifted. People started inviting me to things. Movie night, workouts, even just walking to the mess together. And slowly, I said yes. I stopped hiding in my bunk. I started eating with the team instead of alone. I stayed late to help Jules troubleshoot a drone issue. Not because it was assigned to me, but because I actually cared. I started asking questions during briefings, mentoring the newer soldiers, and calling out when someone needed backup. And to my surprise, they listened. They saw me. Not the way my family did, through a lens of disappointment or comparison, but for who I was becoming, not who I failed to be. One night, on a midnight watch rotation, I found myself sitting beside Sergeant Mendez. She was older than most of us, a former nurse turned field medic. Tough as nails, eyes like steel, hands that had seen too much. We didn't talk for a while, just shared a thermos of terrible coffee and watched the empty horizon. Then she said quietly, "I had a brother." Her voice didn't shake, but the words carried weight. He didn't make it back from his second tour. He always said he felt more at home over there than in his own house. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, "My family hasn't called in almost a year, not even a text." She nodded. People don't always know how to love what they don't understand. Then she handed me a granola bar. "That's why we build our own damn table." That sentence stayed with me. In the months that followed, I built my table, not all at once, not with ceremony. It started small, shared jokes over rehydrated pasta, commiserating over blisters, staying late to help Private Reese with her target grouping, jumping in when someone's radio failed mid-drill. It was in the way Lane always saved me the last slice of chocolate cake. In the way Jules would glance over to make sure I was hydrating after field work. In the way Mendez would say nothing, just toss me a clean rag when I looked too exhausted to ask. It was in the birthday card they stuffed in my locker. Terrible handwriting, worse doodles, but the best damn thing I'd gotten in years. It wasn't flashy, but it was real. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to earn every ounce of affection. I could just exist in it. Things weren't perfect. The missions were still hard. Some days, the silence came back. We lost people. Others transferred out. But I wasn't alone anymore. And when the next round of promotions was announced, I didn't expect anything. I'd stopped chasing validation, but then formation, crisp air. Boots lined up in the gravel. Effective immediately, Staff Sergeant Isabella Vance. Applause broke like thunder, a few whoops, a very suspicious cough from Miller that sounded suspiciously like a cheer. I didn't look for my phone. I looked left. Jules had his fist in the air. Mendez was nodding, proud. Lane mouthed, "Took them long enough." I didn't need anyone's permission to be proud. I already had my people. Later that night, someone smuggled in a real cake. No one would admit who, but I had a hunch it was Tan. He always had too many connections. We crowded around a dented table in the rec room, frosting on our uniforms, laughing until we couldn't breathe. Someone toasted to Staff Sergeant Vance, who somehow made sarcasm a leadership tool. Someone else added, and who finally learned how to lose at poker without threatening to flip the table. I just smiled and took it all in. The moment, the noise, the ridiculousness, and the feeling that, finally, I belonged somewhere. I used to think love only counted if it came from your parents. That if your mother or father didn't see your worth, it meant you didn't have any. Now I know better. Love can come from the people who see you on your worst days and sit beside you anyway. From the ones who tease you like family, defend you like siblings, and hold space for you without demanding you explain yourself. Love doesn't always look like blood. Sometimes it looks like cake on your boots and laughter in a cold tent at 1 a.m. And maybe that was the biggest shift of all. I no longer needed to prove I was worth loving, because the right people had shown me I already was. It came at 7:12 a.m., just a line of text. Lucas's Tech Solutions event is tomorrow. You should come. No greeting, no punctuation, no warmth from my mother. I stared at the screen, unsure whether to laugh or scream. After everything, 5 years of distance, a silent dinner where I'd been treated like a stranger, and not one single follow-up since, I was expected to drop everything and show up? Not because they missed me, not because they cared, but because they wanted me in the audience, sitting, smiling, applauding, just like always. That night, I lay on my cot in the barracks, arms folded behind my head, staring at the metal beams above me. I remembered Lucas's college graduation. They printed a massive banner. "Congratulations, Lucas, our pride." They rented an Airbnb for extended family. I got a last-minute call. "If you're coming, just stand in the back. We're full." I wore the same pressed uniform I'd just earned honors in. They never noticed. They never asked. The next morning, I stood in front of my locker. The uniform hung like a silent witness. Navy blue, starched. Heavy with medals I rarely talked about. A patch over the chest, cold.At. I reached out and ran my hand down the fabric. Each stitch reminded me of something they never saw. The 3-day mission I led in freezing terrain, guiding my squad to safety. The late-night casualty reports I had to file after losing a soldier. The medal I received after navigating an impossible evacuation under fire. None of that had ever mattered to them, but I wasn't wearing it for them, not this time. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Tech Solutions agenda. There he was, Lucas Vance, keynote speaker, strategic development. And just below that, Defense Contract Showcase, Project Falcon. My pulse jumped. I'd been embedded in Falcon since its earliest prototypes. I'd briefed generals, engineers, even Congress on the program. Lucas didn't even know the difference between UAV and ISR until a year ago, and now he was presenting it? I opened a new email draft. Subject, attendance confirmation. Dear Ms. Thorne, I'm Colonel Isabella Vance, current liaison to Project Falcon under DoD authorization. I intend to attend the summit tomorrow as an official military observer. Please confirm credentials for full access to the main session. Respectfully, Colonel Isabella Vance. Her reply was immediate, short, direct. We're honored, Colonel. Credentials prepared. See you tomorrow. Done. I didn't tell anyone. Not Miller, not Mendez, not Jules. This wasn't about validation. This was about reclamation. The rest of the day, I moved like I was prepping for deployment. I ironed every crease in my uniform until it could hold a blade, cleaned my boots until they reflected the ceiling lights, rechecked every medal's placement against the regulation guide. I even polished my ID badge like it mattered more than usual, and it did, because this time I wasn't walking into enemy fire. I was walking into the room where my worth had always been denied. At one point, I paused and stared at myself in the mirror, and for the first time, I didn't see the difficult daughter. I saw a leader, a survivor, a woman who had built a life from scratch, with no applause, no shortcuts. I thought of Grandpa, the only one in my family who ever served. He once told me, The uniform will outlive their opinions. Wear it for yourself. He'd passed before I earned my rank, but I remembered that line like scripture. But doubt, oh, it came, right before lights out. That familiar voice in my head. What if they still look right past you? What if they laugh? Or what if you go and it means nothing? I almost took the uniform off. Almost, but then I remembered other voices. Jules handing me a cupcake after a night shift. You matter more than you think, ma'am. Mendez after I broke down during a failed training op. Showing up is sometimes the bravest thing you'll do. Even Miller, gruff and clipped. Anyone who doesn't see what you've done doesn't deserve to. They didn't approve of me. They stood with me. So I kept the uniform on. And as the sun rose behind me, casting sharp angles through the barracks window, I stood tall, not to intimidate, not to shock, but to remind myself that I'd already survived the worst, being invisible in my own home. And if you've ever had that moment where you stop shrinking just to make others comfortable, where you choose to show up, not for revenge, but because your silence no longer protects you, then you'll understand what I'm about to do. Because tomorrow I'm not coming as their daughter. I'm walking in as me. The moment I stepped through the glass doors of Tech Solutions HQ, something shifted, not just inside me but in the atmosphere. Security scanned my badge, looked up at my uniform, and immediately stood taller. Good morning, Colonel, the officer said with a respectful nod. Conference is on the 3rd floor. CEO Thorne is expecting you. I returned the nod and entered the elevator. No hesitation. No doubt. My boots echoed with authority, each step a statement. The 3rd floor bustled with energy. Assistants tapping furiously on tablets, executives sipping last-minute espresso, camera crews doing mic checks. Everyone was moving except one person. Lucas, front and center, surrounded by staff, tablet in hand, giving orders, smiling like the king of the building. He didn't notice me right away, but when he did, he stopped mid-sentence. His expression flickered between confusion, disbelief, and panic. His gaze dropped to the uniform, the nameplate, the medals. Then his eyes shot up, locking with mine. He couldn't finish. I didn't flinch, didn't blink. Behind him, my father emerged from a side room, still tall, still sharp in his tailored suit. The same commanding presence I used to shrink under, until today. His eyes widened, and for a beat, he looked unsure. Like the floor beneath him wasn't as solid as it had been for decades. I let them look, let them sit in that moment, let them realize they'd underestimated me for too long. Colonel Vance. The voice came from the left, Rachel Thorne, CEO, poised, unapologetically powerful. She extended her hand. We're honored to have you. Thank you, I said, shaking it firmly. She turned to the team behind her. For those who haven't had the pleasure, this is Colonel Isabella Vance, Department of Defense Liaison to Falcon. She'll be observing and advising today. Her voice didn't rise, but the message thundered. All eyes turned to me. Lucas shifted awkwardly. My father's jaw clenched, but I was already walking beside Rachel toward the main conference room. Inside, rows of leather chairs faced a towering screen. The front row was labeled for senior officials. A nameplate had been added, Coli Vance. I sat down, calm, unbothered. Lucas was next to present. He fidgeted with the remote as people filtered in. When he started, his tone had changed. The confidence was still there, but now it sounded performative, tense. He clicked through slides, projections, graphs, cost benefits, empty language. Then came the Falcon specs. I saw it coming. He got the numbers wrong, described the wrong interface, fudged the terminology. An engineer 2 rows behind me whispered, "That's not right." I raised my hand slightly. "Lucas," I said, voice even. "Do you mean the dual-spectrum feedback loop in the Falcon mid-tier ISR package?" He paused. His mouth opened, closed. Yes," he said eventually. I tilted my head. "Because that loop is part of a separate protocol. What you're describing is the latency filter in Tier 1 analytics." A few heads turned. Rachel glanced my way. "Colonel, would you be willing to clarify?" I stood, walked to the front like it was mine, because it was. "With your permission," I said, nodding to Rachel. "I'll email the updated specs and simulation data. The last round of tests showed a 12% improvement once we integrated adaptive learning into the targeting flow." Rachel nodded. "Please do. That's the level of detail we need." Lucas looked like someone had pulled the air from the room. The rest of the session blurred into quiet triumph. Every question about Falcon came to me. Every time Lucas stumbled, no one saved him. No one interrupted me. No one questioned my authority. I didn't gloat. I didn't even look his way. I simply did what I always did. Showed up, spoke clearly, led quietly, and they followed. After the Q&A, Rachel leaned over. "Would you mind staying for the executive debrief?" "Of course," I said. As I stood, my father appeared at my side. "Isabella," I turned. He looked smaller somehow. His voice dropped. "Why didn't you tell us?" I gave him the same answer I'd rehearsed 100 times in silence. "You never asked." And then I walked away. In the debrief room, Rachel introduced me, not just as liaison, but as the primary defense authority on Falcon. "All revisions," she said, "will go through Colonel Vance moving forward. She has final sign-off." Silence, then quiet nods. I could feel Lucas behind me, watching, fuming, powerless. One of the engineers turned to Rachel and whispered, "She's related to Thomas?" Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Thomas is her father." Gasps weren't audible, but they were there, in the shift in posture, the glances. Rachel looked at my father. "You never mentioned your daughter was a colonel?" He cleared his throat. "It never came up." Rachel smiled, just barely. "Well, it just did." As we wrapped up, I stood, straightened my uniform. "I'll prepare the revised documentation and schedule follow-ups with the integration leads," I said to the room. Calm, efficient, in control. I turned to Rachel. "Thank you for the platform," she nodded. "Thank you for the clarity." I walked out without looking back. I didn't cry, I didn't shout. I didn't collapse, because the real power isn't in making them feel small. It's in realizing you never needed them to see you to be real. But today, they saw. And if you've ever lived for the moment, someone finally acknowledges your worth. Not out of guilt, not out of pity, but because you stood there, undeniably whole. Then you know exactly what this was, and it was only the beginning. I hadn't even changed out of my uniform when the first call came. The Tech Solutions Summit had ended barely an hour before. I was in the back of a quiet rideshare, staring out the window, still trying to slow my heartbeat when my phone lit up. Dad. I stared at the name for a moment. Just seeing it made my shoulders tense. Then I answered. "Isabella," he began, voice low, like he wasn't sure how loud he was allowed to be. That was quite something. I waited. "I didn't know," he said finally. "About your position, your role. I mean, I knew you were in the military, of course, but—" "You didn't know because you never asked," I said. He paused. "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't." There was something else in his voice, regret, maybe, or fear, the kind of fear people get when they realize they're losing control of the narrative. I wanted to tell you I was proud. Today, you were impressive. Thank you, I replied. I meant it, but I didn't feel better. I'd like to talk more. Maybe lunch next week? Just the two of us. I closed my eyes. The younger me would have said yes right away, desperate to grasp any scrap of attention. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I'll think about it, I said. That's fair, he replied. Take care of yourself, Izzy. That name, a relic from childhood. It didn't sting this time, but it didn't feel like mine anymore either. Back at the base, I hung up my uniform. The metals clinked softly against the hanger, and for a second, the silence of the barracks wrapped around me like fog. I lay on my cot, arms folded behind my head, and stared at the ceiling. Exhausted, not physically, emotionally. There's a kind of fatigue that comes after the high, the one you never prepare for, the one that whispers, you got what you wanted, so why do you still feel hollow? At 10:47 p.m., my phone rang again. Mom. I debated letting it go to voicemail. But something told me to pick up. I did. There was no hello, just, I don't understand why you felt the need to embarrass your brother like that. I blinked. Excuse me? That presentation was important to Lucas. You undercut him in front of his peers, in front of executives, in front of Rachel Thorne. It wasn't personal, I said calmly. I was doing my job. You could have said something privately. You mean like all those times you corrected me privately? Like when you told me in front of the entire family that Lucas had real goals while I was playing soldier. She didn't respond. I continued. I didn't plan anything to humiliate him. I simply existed. That was enough. There was a shift in her voice, quieter, sadder. I just miss you. I said nothing. I know we haven't always done things right, she continued. But we're family, Bella. That has to count for something. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let it break me. You can't call it family only when it's convenient, I said. You can't disappear when I struggle, then try to reconnect when I succeed. We never meant to hurt you, but you did. The silence grew long. Then she asked, So what now? You cut us off forever? No, I said. I'm not cutting you off. I'm setting boundaries. That's what healthy people do. She sighed. Well, I hope you're proud of yourself. I closed my eyes. I am. Then I hung up. I didn't cry. Not that night. Not the next morning. Not even when I got the text from Lucas. You made your point. Hope it was worth it. No anger, no remorse, just dismissal. It stung, but only for a second. Because deep down I realized something. He always knew who I was. He just didn't want to admit it, because it challenged his place in the story. The next day I walked out to the quad with a cup of black coffee, still in PT gear. Sergeant Miller spotted me from across the lawn and wandered over, hands in his pockets. You alive? Barely, he smirked. They see you now? They don't really have a choice anymore. We sat in silence for a moment, then I said it out loud. I thought it would feel more satisfying. Validation is adrenaline, he said. Wears off fast, peace takes longer, but it sticks. I looked over at him. You always have a quote ready. I read fortune cookies, he deadpanned. I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in days. That night, I pulled out an old notebook and uncapped a pen. No emails, no drafts, just paper, ink, me. To my family, I didn't walk away to be cruel. I walked away to breathe, to think, to live. You may see it as abandonment. I see it as self-preservation. I've built something I'm proud of, and I'm no longer willing to shrink just to fit the version of me you've always clung to. If you ever want to know the real me, you'll have to meet me where I am, not where you left me. Until then, I'm not waiting. Isabella. If you've ever had to walk away from people you once begged to stay, you know the grief, but also the freedom. And I promise the freedom is worth it. 3 weeks. That's how long it had been since the summit, since the confrontation, since I drew the line. No calls, no texts. And for once, I didn't chase silence with panic. I let it sit beside me like a quiet friend. I started rebuilding, not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly. Each morning I ran, not to escape, not to train, just to move. 5 miles before sunrise, the sky still a bruised gray, the world barely awake. I ran until my breath steadied, until my mind stopped spinning, until my legs reminded me that I was still alive and strong. No music, no phone, just me and the sound of gravel underfoot. I began cooking again, not military meal prep or protein bars, but real cooking. I bought garlic and fresh basil from the market outside base. I learned how to dice an onion properly, burned rice twice, made the best damn chicken soup I'd ever tasted on a Sunday. Eating alone no longer felt sad, it felt sacred. I set the table, I lit a candle, I ate slowly, like I deserved it. Work became work, meetings, field reports, calls with Washington, some stressful days, some easy ones. But I showed up different now. I didn't fight for airtime, I didn't over-explain. I didn't fold my voice down into something smaller just to keep peace. When I spoke, people listened, not because I was louder, but because I finally believed myself. I also started therapy. Jules recommended someone, a retired Marine-turned-counselor who didn't flinch at silence. Our first session, I said nothing for 10 minutes. He didn't rush me, just sipped his coffee and waited. Eventually, I spoke. Not everything, not yet, but enough. Enough to realize that healing wasn't about fixing myself. It was about forgiving myself, forever believing I was broken in the first place. Wednesday nights became sacred. Jules and I would walk to the same cafe. I always ordered chamomile tea. She got espresso and a sugar cookie the size of her face. We didn't talk about family anymore. We talked about where she wanted to transfer next, what kind of dog she wanted, whether I'd ever let her drag me to salsa class. I will, she said, eventually. I smiled. We'll see. Colonel Vance, the Latin flame, she teased. I rolled my eyes, but something in me softened every time she joked like that. Because in her laughter I didn't feel judged. I felt chosen. One afternoon I got caught in the rain. It wasn't dramatic, no lightning, no thunder, just soft drizzle on a Tuesday. When I forgot my jacket, I stood under a tree waiting, and instead of cursing the weather, I closed my eyes. The drops hit my cheeks like soft taps, and I remembered a version of myself who used to hide from rain, from mess, from anything unpredictable. Now, I let it wash over me. At the barracks, Miller knocked on my door one evening with a bag of trail mix and no explanation. He sat on my floor, leaned against the bed, and said, "Wanna not talk for a while?" We didn't. We just sat. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was comfortable. Like music I didn't need to understand to feel. Before he left, he said, "You seem settled." "I'm trying. It shows." I began sleeping with the window open, letting air in, letting noise in, letting life in. The city hum was no longer a threat. It was proof that the world kept moving, and so did I. I stopped waiting for a call from my mom. I stopped checking if Lucas had texted again. I let them stay silent. I let me stay still. Some nights I lit a candle and reread old journals. There were pages I couldn't get through without flinching, so much self-blame. So many sentences that started with, "Maybe if I had just..." I crossed some of them out, not to erase them, but to reclaim space. One night, I added a line to the margin. That version of me was trying, and she deserved better. I didn't plan this version of my life. It wasn't some dramatic reinvention. It was 1,000 tiny choices. To rest instead of rehearse an imaginary argument. To laugh when Jules teased me instead of overthinking it. To say no to lunch with people who drained me. To say yes to things like ceramic class, even if I was terrible. And maybe most of all, to stop proving and just be. If you've ever woken up and realized that peace doesn't come crashing in. It comes gently, like sunlight through the blinds. If you've ever stood in the middle of a quiet life and thought, this doesn't look like winning, but it feels like freedom, then you'll understand this chapter. Because healing isn't loud, but it's real, and it's mine now. They weren't blood, but they were mine. Jules, Miller, Mendez, even Lee, who barely spoke, unless it was to call out a target or hand you black coffee, with no questions asked. These were the people who showed up for me, not because they had to, but because they saw me, even when I wasn't trying to be seen. And somehow that was enough. I started mentoring the new officers, not because I was assigned to, I just recognized the look. That tense jaw, the fidgeting hands, the silent panic hiding behind every yes ma'am. Lieutenant Ramos was one of them. She couldn't get through a briefing without tripping over her words. So I stayed late, helped her rework her slides, taught her how to breathe between sentences, not just to survive them. By the end of the month, she delivered her debrief with a quiet strength I hadn't seen in her before. She walked off the podium, looked at me, and whispered, "I believed myself this time." I nodded. That's where it starts. The cookout happened the next weekend. Nothing fancy, just cheap lawn chairs, bad music, and Miller waving tongs around like he was commanding a mission. Someone brought homemade pie. Lee actually smiled twice. Jules spilled mustard on her pants and cursed like a sailor. We played cards, told stories. Someone rigged fairy lights around the perimeter. It was nothing, and it was everything. At one point, I stood near the grill, holding a paper plate full of ribs, and looked around. This was the safest I'd ever felt, with no walls up, no mask on, no one waiting for me to fail. Just people who liked me for who I was, not what I represented. Family by choice, not by force. 2 days later, I got an email. Community event. Downtown. Co-hosted by Tech Solutions and local nonprofits. Guest list included executives, former project leads, donors. Lucas was listed as a featured speaker. My mother's name appeared right underneath. Isabel Vance, contributor. I stared at the screen for a full 5 minutes. Then, without overthinking it, I clicked Accept RSVP. I didn't wear my uniform, no medals, no authority, just a soft blouse, jeans, low heels, hair down, no rank on display. I walked into the courtyard and took a deep breath. There were food trucks, booths, live music, politicians working the crowd, engineers sipping wine from plastic cups, and somewhere in the middle of it all, my past. I kept to the back as Lucas spoke. He looked the same, pressed collar, firm voice, controlled smile. His speech was smooth. The audience nodded. He said all the right things. I used to think that was success. Now it felt like someone else's definition. After he stepped down, I wandered toward the refreshments. That's when I saw her, my mother. She looked elegant, as always. Pearls, neat bun, pressed skirt suit. Holding a wine glass, like it was a shield. She noticed me before I could pretend I hadn't seen her. "Isabella," she said, stepping closer. "You came?" I did. "You look, well." "I am." There was a pause. Then she smiled. too rehearsed. Your brother's presentation went beautifully, don't you think? I didn't answer right away. It was polished, I said. Lucas is doing important work, she continued. I tilted my head. He is, so am I. Her face faltered. I let the silence stretch, not to punish her, just to breathe in it. Then she asked, Are you still upset? No, I said honestly. I'm not upset, just not invested anymore. That landed. Her expression cracked, just for a moment. I miss you, she said quietly. I miss the idea of what we could have been, I replied. But I've stopped waiting for it. She looked away, and maybe for the first time, she understood that she'd lost access. Not out of spite, but because I had outgrown the room she kept trying to trap me in. I hope you're happy, she said finally. I'm free, I said. That's better. I didn't wait for her to speak again. I gave her a gentle nod. Take care. Then I turned and walked away. No drama, no collapse, just choice, just peace. I bought a drink, found a spot beneath a tree and sat quietly, watched people laugh, watched kids with balloon animals chase each other between tables. Jules spotted me half an hour later holding 2 iced coffees. She handed one to me and said, You good? I sipped. I'm here. She nodded. That's enough. We sat like that for a while. No need to explain anything. She didn't ask what happened, and I didn't offer. Because what mattered most wasn't what they said to me. It was what I'd finally said to myself. You don't need to earn your place anymore. You already belong. If you've ever faced someone who made you feel small and realized they don't hold the blueprint of your worth anymore, you know what this feels like. Not revenge, not victory, just freedom. The sky was turning that soft golden pink I always loved, quiet in between. I'd finished work early and walked out to the old trail behind the barracks. No phone, no rush, just the sound of gravel under my boots and the kind of stillness that didn't make me flinch anymore. I found my favorite spot by the bend in the path, a bench half covered in ivy, slightly tilted, forgotten by most. It used to feel lonely. Now it felt like mine. I sat down, stretched my legs, and let the breeze move through me. I'd spent so many years bracing, waiting for the next rejection, the next silence, the next reminder that I didn't fit. But nothing was coming now. No one to impress, no one to prove anything to. Just me, breathing, choosing, existing without explanation. I pulled out my notebook. The pages were messy now. Ink smudges, coffee stains, a few dog-eared corners. But inside was every thought I hadn't been allowed to say out loud. I flipped to the last page and wrote, They didn't see me. That's not my fault. I see me now, and that's enough. I closed the cover slowly, like closing a chapter, not in anger, but in peace. A group of younger officers jogged past, laughing breathlessly. One of them, a girl maybe 19, 20, glanced my way. She looked nervous, too aware of herself, just like I used to be. I offered a nod. She smiled back, small but real. I didn't need to say anything. She saw something in me, and I saw something in her. That was enough. Later that evening, Jules found me outside the mess hall, sipping tea. She sat down beside me without asking. Doing the whole wise and quiet routine again, she teased. I smiled. Maybe I've earned it. She bumped her shoulder into mine. You have, and then some. We didn't need to talk much. That's the thing about family. You don't have to explain yourself every second. They already get it. As the sun dipped lower, I looked out at the horizon, soft, calm, endless. This wasn't the life they wanted for me, but it was the one I built with my own hands. And I wouldn't trade it for anything. If you've ever been told you were difficult, dramatic, or too much. If you've ever been the afterthought in your own family's story, you're not broken. You were just waiting to come home to yourself. Some of us don't get the apology. We get free, and that's more than enough. If this story spoke to something inside you, if you've ever had to walk away just to protect your peace, I want to hear from you. What was the moment you finally chose yourself? Drop a comment below. Whether it's one sentence or a whole story, this is a space where you're seen. And if you're still finding your way, know this: you're not alone. You never were.